The case of Jake Wagner. Hannah Mae Roden, 13, and Edward Jake Wagner, 18, met at a dance and quickly became lovers. As a result, the Roden and Wagner families began to spend time together, sharing weekends and parties, and Hannah Mae and Jake's love continued to grow. When Hannah Mae turned 15 years old, she revealed that she was pregnant. Jake was delighted with the news and hoped his family would be too. The Wagner family placed great emphasis on tradition in family lineage, and they adored children, viewing them as a continuation of their traditions. In fact, they often passed the name down from generation to generation, as seen in Jake's family, with his father being George Wagner III and his brother George Wagner IV. On the other hand, the Roden family had a more practical approach to family life. Even though they were divorced, Christopher Roden Sr. and Dana Roden remained close and devoted to their 3 children, prioritizing their happiness above all else. Unlike the Wagner family, the Rodens lived modestly, with Christopher working odd jobs and Dana as a nurse's assistant. Despite economic limitations, the Roden family instilled strong traditional values in their children, including Christopher Jr., Hannah Mae, and Clarence, Frankie. The family was overjoyed when Hannah Mae gave birth to a daughter named Sophie, and they threw a big party. However, when Jake asked Hannah Mae to move in with him and his family, she refused. She became increasingly wary of Jake due to his increasingly controlling and aggressive behavior. Hannah Mae was initially attracted to Jake's caring and thoughtful nature, but over time, she realized that Jake was trying to limit her independence. Jake's aggression repeatedly caused Hannah Mae's feelings for him to cool. Her refusal to move in with Jake created tension with him. Jake believed that Hannah Mae was preventing Sophie from growing up in a safe and healthy environment. Despite Hannah Mae's denials, Jake became increasingly controlling. Hannah Mae finally ended the relationship in March 2015, tired of Jake's aggressive behavior. At that point, the Wagner family wanted sole custody of Sophie. Jake had to put in a lot of effort to convince Hannah Mae to sign over custody of the child to him and his brother. However, Hannah Mae refused. In a heated exchange, Jake angrily sent a text message saying that if necessary, he would use force to gain custody of Sophie. This revelation confirmed the Wagner family's willingness to use coercion and intimidation to achieve their goals. To protect herself and her daughter from this unscrupulous family, Hannah decided to distance herself and raise her child alone. She chose to work as a nursing assistant, continued her studies, and took care of Sophie herself. The situation escalated when Hannah became pregnant again. Although Hannah confirmed that the child was not Jake's, he still had doubts and tried to discover the truth. In December 2015, Jake logged into Hannah's social media accounts but found no evidence of an affair. A trial ensued, involving repeated interactions between the Wagner family and Hannah. In one text message, Hannah asserted that the Wagner family would have to get rid of her before they could gain custody of Sophie. Jake shared this message with his family, angering them. His grandmother, Rita Newcomb, 65, retaliated by forging an important custody-related document. During the custody trial for Sophie, Christopher Roden and George Wagner III had a heated argument. This incident caused a complete rift in the relationship between the two families. The Wagner family soon came up with a terrible idea. They believed that Hannah Roden was uncooperative and decided that the only solution was to eliminate her and the entire Roden family in order to gain custody of Sophie. By Christmas 2016, this twisted idea was the start of a terrible crime. While everyone focused on love and celebration during the holiday season, the Wagner family had other intentions. They held a family vote to decide whether to continue with their evil plan or not. After everyone agreed, they assigned each person roles and began preparing. The Wagner family spent 5 months researching the Roden family home, including surveillance cameras, daily habits, and work schedules of each Roden family member. Each member of the Wagner family was assigned a specific task. Angela Wagner purchased a communications blocking device and planned to secretly install it on the Roden family's phone to prevent anyone from being able to contact the police. George Wagner III offered to build a homemade silencer and handle transportation the night of the crime, securing a truck and not attracting attention. Meanwhile, Sophie was safe at home with Angela because the court had awarded Hannah and Jake joint custody of Sophie. The Wagner family chose the time when it was their turn to care for Sophie in order to keep Sophie safe. It was clear that the Wagner family had meticulously planned every detail to carry out a perfect execution. At approximately 8 a.m. on April 22, 2016, George Wagner III visited Christopher Roden under the pretense of offering Christopher a job opportunity that could improve his family's financial situation. However, the job offer was just an excuse to get into the house. A moment later, Christopher Roden Sr. opened the door. A while later, as usual, Bobby Jo Manley arrived at Christopher's house to take care of the Roden family's animals. While outside the house, she noticed someone was inside, which was unusual for that time of day. Every member of the Roden family usually went about their work and was not at home. However, when she entered the house, she found Christopher and his cousin Gary, 38, lying in a pool of blood. Horrified, Bobby grabbed the phone and called emergency services, reporting what she had seen and asking for assistance. Still shaking, Bobby went to other relatives' houses and knocked loudly on one of their doors. A 3-year-old boy, the son of Clarence Frankie Roden, appeared, and Bobby asked him where his parents were. However, the boy did not respond but just pointed toward the bed. When she entered the house, she witnessed another horrifying scene. Clarence and his wife, Hannah Hazel, lay motionless. Lying between them was their 6-month-old baby, still alive but covered in the blood of Clarence and Hannah Hazel. After Bobby's 911 call, police quickly arrived on the scene. As the officers approached the Roden property, a neighbor intervened, sensing worry. He requested that the officers check 2 additional addresses of family members. His concern was justified, as police found bloodied bodies in the house. The victims were identified as Dana, 19-year-old Hannah Mae, and 16-year-old Christopher Jr. The attackers had spared Hannah's youngest child, a baby girl only a few days old. Later, another victim was discovered, 44-year-old Kenneth, the elder Roden's brother, who lived a 15-minute walk from the others. By 2 p.m., 8 victims had been identified: Christopher Sr., Dana, Clarence, Hannah Hazel, Christopher Jr., Hannah Mae, Kenneth, and Gary. The only survivors were young children, a 3-year-old, a 6-month-old, and a 4-day-old newborn, along with 2-year-old Sophie, who was at the Wagner home at the time of the incident. After examining the bodies, police concluded that all the victims had been killed in their sleep by gunshot wounds. Detectives later reconstructed the events of that day. Christopher Sr. was awake when the attackers burst into the house, as evidenced by a wound on his right arm. Christopher Sr. attempted to defend himself but was hit with 9 shots to the head, torso, and limbs. In addition, 5 bullets were removed from Dana Roden's neck and head. The rest of the family died from gunshot wounds to the head. Gary was shot 5 times, Christopher Jr. 4 times, Clarence and his wife Hannah Hazel 3 times each, and Hannah Mae twice. Kenneth was the only one shot once. In total, the assailant fired 32 shots, with some shots fired after the victims were already dead. Some bodies also showed signs of physical abuse. Since no one in the area heard anything, investigators believe the perpetrators used silencers, indicating a carefully planned and executed act. It was clear that the victims were targeted, and someone wanted revenge on the entire Roden family. During the search, police found 5 Remington shell casings of different types and an unused bullet from a different gun model. The scale of the case shows that this was a case with multiple murderers. Leonard Manley, Dana's father, claimed that the criminals must have known the family well, or the dogs would have been barking loudly. The question of who committed this act kept police officers busy. The Attorney General's office provided over $20,000 for the Roden family's funeral. The Roden family were buried in several stages. On April 28, 2016, Gary was the first to be laid to rest in South Shore, Kentucky. Hannah Hazel's funeral followed on May 1st in the village of Atway, Coteau County, Ohio. The remaining members were buried on May 3rd in West Portsmouth, in the same county. Many local residents attended to pay their respects to the family. The surviving children were placed in the care of relatives. the neighborhood was gripped by fear. Police advised relatives of the victims to take precautions and warned all residents of Pike to stay in their homes at night. The brutal mass murder outraged residents across the state, who demanded that the investigation's findings be made public and the perpetrators be caught as soon as possible. As part of the investigation, the murdered family's 3 homes had been searched, followed by several more vehicles the following day. Forensic experts had participated in the investigation and had meticulously examined the homes, but no DNA evidence of the suspects had been found in any of the homes. Cameras had been installed in the houses, but they had not provided any useful information because they had been disabled. It seemed the culprit had planned every detail carefully, leaving no clues behind. However, detectives eventually discovered a key piece of evidence that had helped solve the case. An important detail was that marijuana plants were discovered at 3 crime scenes. At one location, around 200 plants were found. The police believed the cannabis was grown for sale, rather than personal use. This led to speculation about the involvement of Mexican drug traffickers. However, the amount of cannabis found was too small to suggest an attack by an entire cartel. In January 2017, a close relative of the Roden family was arrested for drug trafficking. This was considered a coincidental circumstance. Leonard Manley stated that his daughter, Dana, had no involvement with the cannabis operations. Some family members confirmed that the older brothers, Christopher and Kenneth Roden, grew marijuana, but they were unaware of any large-scale cultivation. Specialized equipment for breeding chickens for fighting, as well as cages with roosters, were found at the Rodens' house. However, it soon became clear that illegal cockfighting was not the cause of the homicides either. Months went by without uncovering the true motive behind the crime. On April 13, 2017, local authorities announced they lacked sufficient evidence to make any arrests. Nevertheless, prosecutor Rob Yum stated the investigation was ongoing, suggesting they had some leads they were not yet ready to disclose. Another year had passed since the mass crime occurred, and its memorial service went largely unnoticed. There was no coverage in the local press, and neither the sheriff nor the prosecutor attended the memorial service. This led the community to believe that the investigation had stalled. However, on May 12, 2017, a special weapons and tactics team unexpectedly raided a home in Pike County, about 10 miles from the crime scene. Initially, they were searching for suspects, but it was later revealed that they were gathering evidence. Detectives also searched a house in Adams County that had once been owned by Jake Wagner, although he had sold it by then. The investigation took a dramatic turn on June 20, 2017, when the focus shifted to the Wagner family. The investigation included 26-year-old Jake, 27-year-old George IV, 47-year-old George III, and 48-year-old Angela, who lived approximately 15 miles from the victim. The Wagner family moved to Kenai, Alaska, claiming they were struggling to stay in the area. The Wagner family expressed their love for the Roden family, saying their deaths had devastated the Wagner family. The investigation indeed had a breakthrough. Authorities were seeking information from the public about the Wagner family's dealings in guns, ammunition, vehicles, and other related topics. According to the investigation, every family member was involved in the crime. That changed on November 13, 2018, when the Attorney General announced that the Wagners and their sons had been arrested and charged with planning and carrying out the murder. Rita Newcomb, the 65-year-old mother of Angela, and Frederica Wagner, the mother of George Wagner III, had also been arrested for perjury and obstruction of justice. In February 2019, Rita Newcomb had undergone handwriting analysis to confirm her role in forging guardianship documents for Sophie. To avoid going to jail, she had entered a plea deal. As a result, the charges against Frederica Wagner were dropped in June 2019. 2 years later, on April 22, 2021, Jake had reached an agreement with the prosecution. In exchange for revealing details of the crime, all family members would receive life sentences instead of the death penalty. Jake had admitted to killing 5 of the 8 individuals and had received 23 criminal charges, including 8 felonies. The remaining charges had included theft, conspiracy, illegal possession of ammunition, forgery, interception of messages, unlawful use of property, obstruction of justice, corrupt activities, and unlawful intimate conduct with a young woman. Jake had explained that he saw eliminating Hannah May as the only way to ensure custody of his daughter. He believed that if he did not kill the entire Roden family, they would seek revenge and refuse to give custody of Sophie to him. Angela was next to face trial on September 10th. She pleaded guilty to conspiracy, aggravated robbery, and tampering with evidence. In exchange for her testimony against the other defendants, the murder charge was dropped. Angela received a sentence of 30 years in prison. The trial of George Wagner IV had begun on August 28, 2022. Although he denied any involvement in the crime, the prosecution presented evidence of his participation in the planning, execution, and cover-up. Ultimately, George IV was found guilty on 22 counts and was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. George III's trial was scheduled for February 2024. Despite the convictions of his family members, he maintained his innocence. The once harmonious family's descent into madness was baffling, and their actions were unforgivable. The actions of the Wagner family left 3 children orphaned, depriving them of the love of their parents, relatives, and a peaceful life. One couldn't help but wonder what Sophie would be like when she grew up and realized what had happened. A 29-year-old mother of 2 named Mary Mathis Davis vanished without a trace in Lexington on May 30, 1987. The news of her disappearance devastated her family and friends. The following day, her body was discovered behind a nearby supermarket, and the discovery shocked the neighborhood. Despite the police department's best efforts, the case remained unsolved for more than 30 years before a breakthrough in 2023. This case takes us to the city of Lexington in North Carolina. The city of Lexington has a rich and diverse cultural heritage, and its well-known barbecue has earned it the title barbecue capital of the world. Beyond its delectable cuisine, Lexington has a charming downtown populated with interesting stores and eateries that reflect the city's warm and welcoming nature. Popular with tourists, the city's historic uptown Lexington neighborhood has beautifully preserved early 19th century buildings. On February 12, 1958, Mary Mathis Davis was born in Lexington, although little is known about her early years. She had a sister named Lisa Hinkle, whom she grew up with. Mary and Lisa had a tight-knit bond in such a way that nothing could separate them. Lisa described her sister as a lovely, compassionate person who never failed to brighten up a room with her contagious smile. Mary was also said to have had a talent for putting people at ease. When the two came of age, Mary met a man named Richard Davis. A spark began to develop between them as they got to know one another, and before they knew it, they were engulfed in a passionate relationship. As their relationship progressed, Richard Davis knew he wanted to spend the rest of his life with Mary. Mary was overcome with joy when he one day suddenly asked her to be his wife. Without hesitating, she said yes to his proposal. Following the proposal, Mary and Richard started to eagerly make plans for their future as a couple. They talked for hours on end about what their future held, sharing their goals and aspirations for the life they were about to begin. The big day quickly approached, and the couple exchanged vows in a charming and private ceremony. Following the wedding, Mary and Richard began a new chapter in their lives and eagerly anticipated the journey that lay ahead. The years passed quickly, and Mary and Richard soon had 2 lovely children. The first child was a boy, and the second, Tracy, was a girl. Mary's heart brimmed with love, and she cherished every second she had with her kids. Later on, she accepted a position at Lexington's Lanier's Ace hardware store to support her expanding family. Mary didn't mind the fact that the work wasn't the most glamorous. She was appreciative of the chance to earn a consistent income. Even though Mary didn't make much money, it was still enough to pay the bills and put food on the table. Mary was determined to give her family the best life she could despite the difficulties that came with balancing the demands of motherhood and working a job. Life went on at a good pace as the days turned into weeks, then weeks into months. Mary's family was doing well, and she was happy inside. But tragedy was lurking around the corner, ready to strike when least expected. On May 30th, 1987, Mary left her house as usual to go to work. Though it seemed like any other Saturday, She had no idea that it would be her last day on Earth. When Mary got to work, she smiled and said hello to her colleagues before starting her day. She eagerly got started on her tasks. But as the hours passed, she noticed that she was growing hungry and restless. By noon, her stomach was grumbling, and she painstakingly waited for lunchtime. When the time finally came, she was relieved to have the opportunity to leave the four walls of her workplace. She anticipated treating herself to a nice meal. She checked her purse to see if she had enough cash to get herself lunch, and when she was certain she did, she left her store and went to a nearby restaurant. No one would ever again see Mary alive after this. She didn't go back to work. Once her lunch break was over, her absence became more obvious with each second that went by. Her coworkers couldn't help but wonder what was taking her so long. Their confusion turned into worry as the minutes felt like hours. They knew they needed to find her quickly because there were no indications of her return. One of them offered without hesitation to look for her at the eatery where she went to have lunch. The coworker hurried to the eatery as her heart raced, but Mary was not there. The staff at the restaurant was of no assistance either, and the situation was getting worse. When the coworker went back to the hardware store, she reported that she could not find Mary at the eatery. As soon as they heard this, the hardware store employees started to feel afraid and realized they needed to act more decisively. They picked up the phone and dialed the emergency number without delaying further. After providing details of what had happened, the police arrived almost immediately. The coworkers also called Mary's husband and parents to inform them of what was happening. Police started looking for Mary right away that day, but at first, they found nothing. She was completely out of sight. As word of her disappearance spread, a sense of fear and uncertainty overcame the neighborhood. On the other hand, Mary's family was left to struggle through the pain of not knowing where she was or what had happened to her. But they hoped and prayed that their dear Mary would be found alive and well. That night, Richard had a hard time falling asleep. His thoughts kept him up at night. He had a gut feeling that a serious problem had befallen his family. He realized that Mary's disappearance was not a straightforward case of getting lost in the city because it did not make sense to him. His mind wandered to their kids and how he would look them in the face the following day. Unaware of the potential danger to their mother, the innocent kids had been asking Richard about their mother. The idea of breaking the news to them that she might never return was too painful for Richard to bear. But he was aware that he needed to be there for his kids all the way. The next morning, as the sun rose, the search for Mary persisted, but it seemed like all the efforts were in vain. Mary's family and the police were anxiously searching for any information about her sudden disappearance. As the day wore on, the police abruptly received a call reporting the discovery of a dead body behind the building of a nearby supermarket called Winn-Dixie. After the call, a small group of police officers rushed to the scene right away. After seeing a small crowd forming around the body's discovery, the police officers moved in to quickly secure the area. The body had clearly been there for some time, as they could see. It was already starting to emit a slight odor of decay. They were able to recognize the body as belonging to Mary Mathis Davis after closer examination. The officers' faces showed shock and disbelief, but they also knew they needed to get to the root of the investigation. There was no immediate indication of the cause of death, so the police started looking around right away for any possible clues. They also questioned the supermarket staff, but none of them appeared to be particularly knowledgeable about what had happened to the victim. The body was then removed for an autopsy after that. One of the policemen showed up at Mary's family's house the day her body was discovered. As the atmosphere was tense, the officer broke the heartbreaking news to her family. He offered his condolences and shared what little information they had about Mary's case. The news was indeed tragic, as Mary's family was left broken and inconsolable. After a few days, Mary's autopsy results came out, and it was discovered that she was strangled to death. It was also found that she had been sexually assaulted. As a result, Mary's death was classified as a homicide. The authorities started investigating Mary's death as her family was left to mourn and stay strong. The investigators were determined to find the answers to the many unanswered questions they had. Investigators had DNA samples that had been gathered from the crime scene as pieces of evidence. though there wasn't much that could be done with this due to the lack of advanced DNA technology at the time. Regardless of the shortcomings, detectives diligently pursued every lead and tip that came their way, working day and night. At one point, they appealed to the general public for assistance, hoping that someone would come forward with information that would help solve the mystery behind the case. But all efforts proved futile. The detectives felt defeated because it appeared as though the murderer had vanished from the face of the earth. As the days dragged on, becoming weeks and then months, the murderer seemed to have eluded capture. However, Mary's family never lost hope and held on to the belief that justice would eventually be served no matter how long it took. They made an effort to move on with their lives, but the scars from their loss never completely healed. Nearly 25 years after Mary's murder, Lisa, her sister, spoke to the media about the tragedy and pain that she and her family members had to go through when Mary was snatched from them. She spoke candidly to the press about the pain they had experienced and how difficult life had been without her cherished sister by her side. The family had never given up hope that they would one day find the closure they so desperately sought. As Lisa reflected on the happy times they spent together with Mary, despite the pain and loss, she revealed that the family was not interested in exacting revenge and that she was prepared to offer Mary's killer forgiveness. A new group of detectives working on Mary's murder case in 2022 made the decision to examine the evidence at hand. They knew about the developments in DNA technology and were confident that, compared to 1987, they now stood a better chance of cracking the case. After that, the detectives delivered some tangible evidence to the North Carolina State Crime Lab. The North Carolina Bureau of Investigation was contacted to look into the case based on the encouraging results of the analysis of the evidence. From that point on, things accelerated. The Texas-based private forensic genealogy laboratory called Othram was contacted by the State Bureau of Investigation. A DNA piece of evidence was then sent to Othram, where scientists were able to create a genealogical profile for potential suspects. The unidentified male suspect was finally identified after months of diligent work. Russell Grant Woods was the name given as the murderer of Mary Mathis Davis. The detectives felt relieved after making the discovery because they were certain that the case had been solved. There was a problem, though. There was no way to bring the murderer to justice because, according to a background check, he had passed away in 2013 at the age of 58. Russell Grant Woods had previously been named as a suspect in the case, but detectives were forced to focus their attention elsewhere at the time due to a lack of sufficient evidence. Not only that, but it was also learned that Mary and Russell Grant Woods had known each other before her death, although it is unclear what kind of relationship they had. If Russell Grant Woods had still been alive, the state would have moved forward with indictments and accused him of first-degree rape, kidnapping, and murder. Mary's surviving family learned of the case's breakthrough on February 3, 2023. They thanked the detectives for their commitment to the investigation. We prayed that one day we would find the person who violently murdered our beloved Mary. We now have some answers. Although that won't bring Mary back, it does give us a sense of closure. Lori Martin, Mary's niece, told the press. On February 12, 2023, Mary's family held a memorial celebration at Forest Hill Memorial Park in Mary's honor. If she was still alive, that day would have marked her 65th birthday. Mary was a light in this world, and we were blessed to have her as long as we did. She was a loving mother, wife, sister, and friend. We know she is resting easily in the arms of our Lord and Savior, Lori Martin said. There are still many questions that we will never have the answers to, even though the mystery surrounding Mary's death has been solved and the murderer has been found. What sort of connection do you think Mary and Russell had? Post your ideas in the comments section to share with us. Laura Ann Weezar was born on the 10th of May, 1972 to Judy Marie Weezar and Jose Luis Weezar. She was a 6th grader at Chester Moore Elementary School and was just 11 years old when she was kidnapped, sexually assaulted, and then brutally killed. Laura vanished on a Sunday afternoon at around 1:30 p.m. on November 6, 1983, as she was making her way home from a friend's house in St. Lucie County, Central Florida. She was last seen at 2G's Market. She had been sleeping over at a friend's house and was walking home with an armful of clothes. When her parents realized that she hadn't returned home, they contacted the friend she had been with and were told that she had left hours ago. Her parents feared the worst. It was unlike Laura to stay on the streets for long. They searched the area, and when they could not find her, they made their way to the St. Lucie County Sheriff's Office to report their daughter missing. At the time, officers did not take the little girl's disappearance seriously because to them, adolescents who do not return home on time are often playing with their friends and have simply lost track of time. Back then, authorities generally did not take reports of missing adolescents seriously until they had been missing for a longer period of time. A massive search was never carried out for Laura, but authorities put up a bolo sheet. Not long, James Howard Harrison, a deputy from the St. Lucie County Sheriff's Office, came forward and claimed to have seen the little girl walking close to a gas station. It appeared that on the day Laura disappeared, James Howard Harrison was out on patrol. He stated the approximate time he last saw her before claiming to have carried on with his patrol. Although Laura Weezar had a small stature for her age, she was feisty and outspoken. Her family claimed she was very street smart and would never have gotten into a car with a stranger. 3 days after she vanished, on the 9th of November 1983, 2 men discovered Laura's body in a drainage ditch less than 600 yards from the gas station where she was last seen. Her body was sent for an autopsy right away, and asphyxiation was determined to be the cause of her death. She had been raped before being strangled to death. The authorities opened an investigation into the murder case, but they were unable to assemble any tangible proof from the crime scene. After the perpetrator murdered Laura, he then changed the crime scene by putting the body in a drainage ditch to get rid of all the physical evidence. The murderer's actions suggested that he had prior experience handling evidence and crimes. On Laura's body, the police discovered male DNA traces. Since there was no one to match the DNA with at the time, it was kept in a sexual assault kit. The criminal database and DNA technology weren't developed enough back then to give the police any leads about the murderer. The St. Lucie County Police Department's files on Laura's murder case eventually became cold. The St. Lucie County Sheriff's Office created a special cold case squad in 2020, and the team decided to re-examine Laura's case. The investigation was being led by Detective Paul Taylor. The initial investigation had a lot of gaps, which were quickly identified. One of the men who had initially found Laura's body was interviewed by Detective Paul Taylor, who was surprised to be the only officer other than Deputy James Howard Harrison to speak with him. The man remembered that day and the crime scene clearly because, according to him, it had been a terribly traumatic discovery. "I see that little girl lying there every time I close my eyes," the man said. He went on to give Detective Paul Taylor a detailed account of what he had seen that day, but the detective was shocked to learn that his account didn't match the information in Laura's file. "I had already been through the crime scene photos, the case file, and what they're telling me does not match what I'm seeing," said Detective Paul Taylor. He discovered through questioning the witnesses that one of their own deputies had turned the witnesses away and then moved Laura's body away from the initial crime scene. According to the witness, when they called the police to report the discovery of Laura's body, Detective James Howard Harrison was the first officer to arrive at the crime scene. The man claimed that after taking his short statements from them, Harrison sent them away. Since then, they were never contacted by anyone from the St. Lucie County Sheriff's Office regarding the case. It was discovered that, before other officers arrived, spent 20 minutes by himself at the crime scene. The investigation was quick, no suspects were ever named, and the case was promptly filed away for almost 40 years. After hearing this testimony, Detective Paul Taylor decided to take a closer look at Deputy Harrison's background for the first time, and what he discovered was heartbreaking. In February 2022, James Howard Harrison, a former deputy sheriff for the Lucie County Sheriff's Office, was identified by Detective Paul Taylor as the primary and sole suspect in the murder of 11-year-old Laura and Weezar. Since the 1960s, Harrison has served as a pastor and worked in 10 different law enforcement organizations. He was the last person to see Laura alive. He kidnapped her when she was walking home, sexually assaulted her, then killed her and dumped her body in a drainage ditch. It was discovered that Harrison was fired from the sheriff's office 5 months after Laura was murdered. At the time, he had been accused of sexually assaulting several young girls in his church. Co-workers at the sheriff's office had also complained about Harrison because they believed he had behaved inappropriately around young girls while performing his duties as a deputy. I'm actually standing there in front of this victim's family, and I'm telling them that one of our deputies is the one who did it. It's rough, a shock detective, Taylor said. Unfortunately, Harrison passed away before the police could arrest him for the rape and murder of Laura N. He had died of cancer in 2008, but in the year 2020, the investigators obtained a warrant to exhume his body from the cemetery so that a DNA sample could be taken. However, by that time, the DNA from Laura's crime scene had deteriorated too much to match the sample taken from Harrison's body. However, they are certain that Laura and Weezar's murder was committed by former Deputy James Howard Harrison. The St. Lucie County Sheriff's Office has stated that they are certain that Harrison killed Laura, and based on witnesses' accounts, evidence tampering, and a history of sexual assaults on young girls. Due to his inappropriate behavior with young adults, Detective Taylor claimed that Harrison was forced to resign from both his church and the St. Lucie County Sheriff's Office 5 months after the murder of Laura and Weezar. Investigators entered Harrison's DNA into national and state databases. In order to ascertain how many more victims he had, his DNA is currently being tested in a number of Florida cold cases. After the Laura N. Weezar cold case was formally closed, her older brother Joe was in total disbelief that his sister's killer could finally be revealed. It naturally was like a disbelief, a dream, after all this time. "You're telling me you're able to tell us who murdered our little sister?" Joe said. The Weezar family expressed their gratitude for Detective Paul Taylor's tireless efforts in solving this case. But they expressed their disappointment with what they perceived to be a poor quality investigation at the time Laura was killed. They also expressed their desire to question all the detectives who were on the case in 1983. "From our perspective, things were purposefully overlooked and not done. There were such humongous gaps in the investigation," said the Weezar family. What do you think, guys? Did the former deputy abuse children throughout his entire life while serving as a deputy sheriff and holding a position of authority in the community as a preacher? How can we protect our women from these powerful men who take advantage of the systems and laws to further their own evil goals? Please share your opinions in the comments section below. "23-year-old Christa Bramlet was residing in a mobile home in New Providence, Tennessee in 1996. New Providence, which was formerly a small railroad community, was taken over by the nearby community of Clarksville. New Providence saw rising crime rates over the ensuing years, including an increase in drug-related offenses and commercial burglaries. Christa Bramlet regrettably fell victim to these problems. Her case remained cold until after 22 years when her killer was finally arrested. Christa Bramlet was born in 1973 in California to Jim Langley and Kim Venable. Christa was renowned for being witty, compassionate, and smart. Despite having a tight-knit relationship with her family, she made the decision to be financially independent and started living alone. She and her mother had shared a home together in Clarksville until in 1995, when her mother moved to Corpus Christi, Texas with Christa's 2 young children. Christa wanted to stay back because she hoped to finish her GED program in Clarksville. She then lived alone in a mobile home while pursuing her high school equivalency so she could provide a better life for her 2 kids. Although her family described her as warm and loving, her neighbor thought she was distant. In the afternoon of October 28, 1996, Christa Bramlet's landlord, Jeff Pennington, knocked on the door of her trailer in the Sunnydale Mobile Home Park just off Peachers Mill Road. The landlord wanted to discuss with Christa about a recent fire outbreak that occurred a week before, but she never responded. Jeff, however, later discovered something terrible while attempting to contact Christa. In the living room, he saw the shoeless body of Christa Bramlet laying in the flickering glow of a small colored television. A terrified Jeff Pennington said, "Then I called the police." Police in Clarksville, Tennessee were looking into several home killings of women at the time of Christa's murder. Police insisted that the murders had nothing to do with this particle case. When Christa passed away, the Montgomery County Medical Examiner performed an autopsy on her, and the Clarksville Police Department Crime Scene Unit processed the mobile home, looking for any available evidence to pinpoint the killer. According to the autopsy, Christa Bramlet died by suffocation, and a rape kit revealed signs of sexual assault. The forensics sent their DNA findings from the rape kit to the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation's lab, who then loaded the data from that kit into Cody's in the hopes of finding a match. About 6 detectives began the investigation by interviewing between 50 and 60 neighbors in an effort to identify potential witnesses. A neighbor claimed to have seen Christa on the 27th of October 1996, sitting on her porch as she always did. But Christa had a distant demeanor, and people typically left her alone. Police expected to make an arrest within a week after receiving nearly a dozen tips, but the leads fizzled out. No potential suspects were located, and the years passed without an arrest. Detective Michael Ure of the Clarksville Police Department did not receive the news he so wanted until after 22 years in February 13, 2019. It happened that the DNA of the suspect from Christa's rape kit had eventually matched a suspect who was located in Phoenix, Arizona. The DNA on Cody's matched to a 48-year-old man named Kenneth Hudspeth. Detective Michael Ulrey stated that Hudspeth hadn't been mentioned in the investigation up to this point, and no one had noticed him. When Detective Ulrey spoke with the suspect in April, he learned that Hudspeth had indeed lived in the Clarksville at the time of Christa's murder and had left the city in December 1997. Hudspeth didn't deny all the facts presented to him. He claimed to be a friend of Christa, and he allegedly acknowledged being the last person to see her alive. Hudspeth was taken into custody and charged with homicide as a result of the DNA evidence and this interview. He was transferred to Tennessee to await trial after waiving extradition. Investigators learned from Hudspeth's arrest records that he had been detained on multiple occasions for offenses like domestic assault and felony assault. He has served time in jails in Texas and Arizona. His DNA should have been in Cody's years ago, but investigators think the evidence chain of custody may have resulted in lost or ruined swabs. Hudspeth asserted that he had previously done drugs with Christa Bramlet while residing in Clarksville's Sunnydale Mobile Home Park. These allegations were refuted by Christa Bramlet's toxicology report, which revealed a low blood alcohol content. When asked if he had sex with her, he initially denied it, but after seeing the autopsy results and the DNA found inside Bramlet and on her bra, he admitted that he had been so high that he couldn't recall whether or not he had sex with her. "I was on bad dope. Know her. Did I have sex with her? I don't remember that," Hudspeth said in the courtroom. "I just don't see myself raping and killing this woman. I hope I didn't," he said again. As soon as there was a break in the case, Christa Bramlet's family members were informed. "I knew all along that it was just a matter of time. There was never a doubt in our minds that they'd find who had done it," Christa's grandmother said. Finally, after long, painful 22 years, in January 2022, 52-year-old Kenneth Hudspeth was found guilty by the judge and was sentenced to life in prison for the murder of Christa Bramlet. The terrifying thing about this case was that an innocent man almost received a false execution. The mysterious death of Daryl Johnson was thought to be resolved for the majority of 2 decades before heartbreakingly resurfacing as a cold case in 2001. 8 a.m. on February 24th, 1982 was a typical day for all school children in Nampa, Idaho. That morning, 9-year-old Daryl Johnson was seen walking 6 blocks from her house to the Lincoln Elementary School. But she unfortunately never made it there. Her disappearance sparked reaction from concerned neighbors and friends who, alongside with her family, came out en masse to search for her in the whole of Nampa. However, the massive search for Darlin ended 3 days later when a couple of fishermen found her body near the Snake River in rural Canyon County. According to an autopsy, Darlin had been sexually assaulted and had blunt force trauma to her torso and head. Male DNA and hair were also taken by the police from the crime scene. Almost immediately, 34-year-old Charles Fain was arrested in September on suspicion of raping and killing Darylund. A hair sample that Charles Fain voluntarily provided to the police, combined with the fact that he lived a block away from the Johnsons' family, led to his arrest. Fane denied having any part in the killing of Darlene after being taken into custody, and he also passed the polygraph test. However, despite his denial and him passing the test, he was still accused of killing Daryl Johnson. During his trial, prosecutors hinted at the possibility that a shoe trail discovered close to Daryl's body belonged to Fane. In addition, 2 informants from the prison said they overheard Fane confessing to the crime. The 2 informants also got a shorter jail term in return for their testimony. Fane steadfastly maintained his claim that he was innocent despite the evidence they mounted against him. He claimed that he was 100 miles away from the neighborhood where Daryl was killed. The other witnesses supported his testimony, but the judge did not rule out Fane as a suspect despite the absence of solid evidence and no reliable witnesses against him. Charles Fane's polygraph results were accepted as evidence in court, and the DNA technology available at the time was insufficient to establish Fane's innocence. Fane was found guilty on November 4, 1983, and was given a death sentence in March of the following year, but he was later imprisoned for nearly 20 years. In the year 1991, he was only 4 days away from being put to death, but surprisingly, his execution date was postponed. It was then acknowledged 8 years later in 1999. When DNA technology was a little more developed, that the hair DNA discovered on Daryl Johnson's body did not actually belong to Fane, but rather to an unidentified man. Fane was then cleared right away. He was discharged from the maximum security facility in Idaho in August 1999. Several years later, in 2019, detectives reopened the case, and by the next year, they used genetic genealogy to identify David Dalrymple as a suspect. He was 64 years old, and his DNA matched the sample discovered at the crime scene. Dalrymple was already serving a life sentence for kidnapping and abusing a child in 2004. He was formally charged for killing Daryl N. Johnson in January 2022. He is still being held in prison and could soon receive a second life sentence or the death penalty. Charles Fane, on the other hand, is happy to be out of bars and is glad that the perpetrator has finally been caught. He was given a sum of $1,400,000 to compensate for his wrongful conviction and the 18 years he spent in prison. Fane recently purchased a truck for himself using part of the money he received for his wrongful conviction. The case of Summer Baldwin. Summer Baldwin, born in 1976 in Washington, was renowned for her kind and vibrant personality. As a bright student with many friends, she aspired to pursue an acting career. Following high school, Summer enrolled in community college but struggled with her studies. Seeking a change of environment and new opportunities, she moved to Texas with her friends, supported by her parents who hoped she could start anew. However, it is uncertain when Summer's life started to decline. She struggled with addiction to alcohol and illicit drugs, but unfortunately did not reach out to her family for support. As her addiction worsened, she lost her job and began associating with people who had a history of crime. Her dreams of becoming an actress were shattered, and she was eventually forced to work as an escort to make ends meet. Summer's parents remained oblivious to their daughter's struggles, believing she was living a successful life. The information provided about Summer's friends was limited. However, a significant detail emerged. A few months before her death, Summer had been a key witness in a major federal counterfeiting case. This revelation suggested that her murder might have been a contract killing by a criminal gang, drawing the attention of the FBI and putting the investigation under intense scrutiny. The investigation led to the first suspects. Rebecca, Summer's best friend, was called in for questioning by the police. She provided insight into Summer's occupation and mentioned several of her boyfriends, one of whom had a history of aggressive behavior, including physical abuse and persistent stalking after their breakup. This man became the initial suspect in the case. Summer's ex-boyfriend was detained and brought to the station on the same day. However, he vehemently denied any involvement in the case and appeared genuinely surprised and distraught upon learning of Summer's death. Furthermore, he had a solid alibi for the night before the tragedy, having been involved in a drunken brawl at a bar and spending the night in a cell with another individual. As a result, the police were forced to release the first and, at the time, only suspect. Another friend and colleague of Summer named Marguerite provided crucial information to the investigation. Marguerite reported that she saw Summer on the evening of September 11th at a convenience store parking lot. They had a brief conversation. Marguerite recalled that a red van pulled into the parking lot, and a young, physically fit Latino man got out to enter the store, likely to make a purchase. While he was inside, Summer exited the van from the passenger side to greet Marguerite. Summer mentioned that the man was a client she had met for the second time in recent days. After the man returned to the van, he got behind the wheel and Summer quickly re-entered the vehicle. Marjorie didn't notice which direction the van took when it left, nor did she know where Summer and the man were headed. She noted that she had never seen the man before and thought he was not from the area. Her description of him was limited due to the darkness, but she remembered that he had very short hair, similar to a military style. On September 13, 2005, a sanitation worker discovered a suspicious suitcase in a landfill in Lubbock City, Texas, USA. When he opened the suitcase, he was startled to see the body of a woman with red hair. The victim's body had many bruises. The victim's leg was tattooed with the word Summer. The suitcase, which tragically became her coffin, presented a peculiar appearance. Externally, it was covered in garbage and waste, yet surprisingly, it showed no signs of wear and tear, and its wheels appeared brand new. Upon closer inspection, the interior revealed perfectly intact tags in a lining that seemed untouched, giving the impression that the suitcase was brand new. Notably, the plastic attachment for the price tag remained intact, suggesting that the purchaser had not removed it. Further investigation revealed that this particular brand of suitcase was widely available in numerous stores throughout the city. However, this specific large model was only sold in 2 stores. A crucial breakthrough came when the perfectly preserved barcode led investigators to a Walmart store in the same area where Summer was last seen alive. Records showed that 2 identical suitcases were purchased on the day preceding the gruesome discovery, one in the afternoon and the other around 2 a.m., a timing that raised suspicions due to its unusual nature. Police officers promptly visited the store and obtained the surveillance camera footage. After reviewing the footage, they discovered that an elderly couple had purchased the first suitcase. Initially, they didn't raise any suspicions, but they were tracked down and were able to present the suitcase, explaining that it was bought for a vacation. However, the second suitcase was purchased by a young, athletic Latino man with very short hair, similar to a military haircut. This raised suspicions that he might be the person seen with Summer in the supermarket parking lot, as described by a witness. Additionally, the man bought disposable gloves at checkout, further arousing suspicions. The store's external surveillance cameras provided more information, showing the man leaving the store with the suitcase and loading it into a red van. With too many coincidences, the police believed they had identified the suspect and now needed to confirm his identity, locate him, and bring him in for questioning. The man took extreme precautions to avoid detection, using cash instead of a credit card to prevent leaving a digital trail. However, he overlooked the parking lot surveillance cameras, which clearly captured his vehicle's license plate number. The police quickly tracked the vehicle to a rental car company and identified the renter as Rosendo Rodriguez, a reservist in the U.S. Marine Corps. Rosendo had a clean record and was in town for a brief training stint with his unit. Initially, it was difficult for the police to locate Rosendo, as he wasn't staying at the same hotel as his unit. But with his personal details in hand, the police discovered that he had withdrawn a large sum of cash from an ATM at a different hotel, likely the money used to purchase the suitcase and gloves. Further investigation revealed that Rosendo had checked into this hotel under the name Thomas Rosendo, matching his physical description, on September 11th. It appeared that Rosendo had used an alias for unknown reasons. The investigation got a lucky break. Although Rosendo had already checked out of his hotel room, it hadn't been cleaned yet, and it contained crucial evidence. The carpet, bed, and walls had brown stains and splatters that looked like dried blood. A tag from a new suitcase was found near the bed. The trash had used contraceptives and disposable gloves in it. Forensic analysis confirmed the dried blood belonged to Summer. DNA on the contraceptives and gloves matched both Summer and Rosendo. This proved they had found the killer. However, Rosendo had already left the city by then. With this information, it was easy to track him down. Rosendo Rodriguez was born on March 26, 1980, in Wichita Falls, Texas. He came from a low-income family of Mexican immigrants and had a difficult childhood. His father, who struggled with alcoholism, was abusive to his wife and children. As a result, Rosendo was exposed to violence from an early age. He was aggressive and frequently got into fights at school. However, as he matured, he learned to manage his anger. After finishing high school, Rosendo attended Texas Tech University. He lived on his own and worked various jobs, including at a pizzeria and as an office clerk. Eventually, he decided to join the U.S. Marine Corps. His colleagues in the military described him as calm, disciplined, and reliable. They also saw him as a good friend who was always willing to help. Rosendo was well-educated and physically attractive, making him popular with women. On September 15th, Rosendo was arrested at his home in San Antonio. When the police arrived, he remained calm and seemed unaware of the seriousness of the situation. During the search, the police found a striped shirt and shorts that matched the outfit he wore when buying a suitcase. This was caught on surveillance footage. The police also seized his laptop and mobile phone. Initially, Rosendo refused to speak and denied any involvement in Summer Baldwin's murder for several weeks. However, faced with overwhelming evidence against him, he began to provide statements on the advice of his attorney. In these statements, he shared his own account of events, which notably diverged from the reconstruction put together by forensic experts. Rosendo initially stayed at a different hotel than his fellow servicemen due to a booking mistake. Although he realized the error after checking in, he chose not to relocate since the military leadership deemed it unnecessary. However, he failed to explain why he used a different name to register at the hotel on September 10th. That evening, Rosendo rented a van to get around the city more easily. He claimed to have met Summer Baldwin by coincidence. According to his account, he spotted a blonde woman sitting on a roadside bench, covering her face with her hands and seemingly crying. Concerned, he pulled over to check on her and see if she needed assistance. They started talking, and after she calmed down, they went to his hotel room, where they chatted, had a few drinks, but did not engage in any intimate activities. The next morning, Rosendo drove Summer home. They made plans to meet again in the evening. At around 9 p.m., he picked her up from the same location and they went to a supermarket. There, Summer ran into her friend Marjorie. Afterward, they returned to the hotel. According to Rosendo, he and Summer engaged in consensual intimacy at the hotel. However, the situation took a turn when Summer allegedly became aggressive and demanded money. This caught Rosendo off guard, as he claimed he was unaware that Summer was a sex worker. When he refused to pay, Summer reportedly pulled out a knife and threatened him. Rosendo managed to disarm her and punched her in the face, causing her nose to bleed. He claimed that he was acting in self-defense and did not intend to harm her. Shortly after, Summer collapsed onto the bed and began convulsing, foaming at the mouth. Rosendo stated that he attempted to help her but was hesitant to perform mouth-to-mouth resuscitation due to the blood and foam on her face. After a minute, Summer stopped breathing. Realizing Summer was dead, Rosendo panicked. He went to a nearby store, purchased a suitcase and gloves, and returned to the hotel. He then placed Summer's body in the suitcase and disposed of it in a dumpster, knowing it would be taken to the landfill the next morning. Afterward, he checked out of the hotel, returned the rental car, and drove back to San Antonio, pretending as though nothing had happened. Inconsistencies in the suspect's story raised suspicions among investigators. Rosendo Rodriguez's lies were evident due to numerous discrepancies in his account. One inconsistency arose when Marguerite, who met Summer in the parking lot on the night of the crime, stated that Summer mentioned the man was a client she had previously met for a paid encounter. However, Rosendo claimed their interaction was consensual, which contradicts evidence on Summer's body indicating she was taken advantage of. It is possible their initial encounter was consensual, leading Summer to agree to meet him again. Rosendo also claimed he only hit Summer once to calm her down, and she died from a seizure. But the autopsy revealed around 30 fresh bruises on Baldwin's head and body, as well as several stab wounds. Furthermore, evidence indicates she was alive when he packed her into the suitcase, which contradicts his claim that she was already dead. A search of Rosendo's laptop revealed a disturbing information in the days leading up to his arrest. He had been actively searching for information about Summer, including whether she was being searched for and if her body had been found in a landfill. Rosendo also frequently searched for information on Joanna Catherine Rogers, a 16-year-old girl from Lubbock who had gone missing a year and a half prior. Rosendo agreed to a plea deal that included a reduced sentence and no death penalty in exchange for explaining what happened to Joanna. He said he met Joanna, a high school student, in late April 2004. After a few meetings, they went to his hotel room on May 4th, where they got into an argument over money and potential rape allegations. The argument escalated, and Rosendo panicked, covering Joanna's mouth to quiet her, which unintentionally led to her death. In a desperate attempt to dispose of the body, Rosendo put it in his suitcase and threw it into a dumpster. This was the same method he used a year and a half later to dispose of Summer's body. Initially, Rosendo admitted to these events but later claimed his confession was false and that he had been coerced into making it. The police realized they needed to find Joanna's body to build a stronger case, so they launched a massive search of the city dump. Over a year later, they made a miraculous discovery: a suitcase containing Joanna's remains. Despite severe decomposition, DNA testing confirmed the identity of the remains. This new evidence allowed authorities to charge Rosendo as a serial offender with a consistent modus operandi, committing similar heinous crimes. During the trial, the verdict was clear. Rosendo was guilty of first-degree murder. The court decided on the death penalty, largely due to the fact that Summer Baldwin was 3 months pregnant when she was murdered. This aggravating factor was a key consideration in the sentencing. Rosendo was sentenced to death by lethal injection. Despite the overwhelming evidence, Rosendo and his lawyers filed multiple appeals, claiming errors in misconduct by investigators. However, all appeals were rejected. While on death row, Rosendo maintained a blog on criminal justice and policy issues. On March 27, 1938, Rosendo Rodriguez was executed for his crimes at Huntsville Prison in Texas, 1 day after his 30th birthday. This marked the 4th execution in Texas and the 7th in the United States that year, nearly a decade after his conviction. Pamela Jean Shelley was born on the 25th of July, 1969 in Houston, Texas, but she was raised in the quaint community of Ashdown, Arkansas, which had a population of 4,500 at the time. Pamela comes from a family that worked hard. Her mother worked at a nursing facility while her father drove a truck for lodging. She also had a brother and a sister. Pamela Shelley was described as being extremely kind and outgoing with everyone around her. When Pamela Shelley was 16 years old, she met her first husband, Jesse Suggs, who was 20 years old at the time. They discussed their future plans of getting married one day. However, Pamela's father wanted her to complete high school before any other thing. So, following her high school graduation, she and Jesse got married immediately, not long after. They became parents, giving birth to Kayla, their first child and daughter. Just 4 years into their marriage, Pamela and Jesse began to have problems. Jesse frequently used narcotics to get high, and eventually his drug problems caused him to lead a life of crime. Pamela and Jesse had an on-and-off relationship for a while before finally getting a divorce. In the summer of 1991, Pamela Shelley got married to another man by the name of Gary. They conceived a child they named Dustin. The marriage lasted just a year, after which she briefly moved back in with Jesse, her ex-husband, before finally moving in with her parents. Some years later, Pamela Shelley reconnected with Ronnie Hendricks, a childhood acquaintance. She and Ronnie always seemed to click, but they hadn't spoken in over a decade. After they rekindled their relationship, Ronnie proposed to her and invited her and the kids to come live with him in Cuero, Texas, to which Pamela agreed. In the summer of 2000, she and her son Dustin alongside Ronnie then traveled to Cuero by car for 8 hours. Pamela's daughter, Kayla, was to join them few months later. The family of Ronnie Hendricks resided in Cuero, Texas. According to Ronnie's mother, Deborah, everything was going well with them until Kayla moved in. She said, Kayla altered the entire dynamic in the house, making her son Ronnie to frequently get into an argument with her because he would always push her to assist around the house. Deborah and Ronnie claimed that Kayla also insisted on her and her mother returning to Arkansas so she could be with her father. Ronnie and Pamela became at odds virtually every day until horror struck on the 6th of January 2001. Ronnie Hendrick claimed he was on the porch of their home on the 6th of January 2001 when he heard a gunshot from inside. At exactly 5 o'clock, he dialed 911 and not long, the DeWitt County Police arrived the scene. On getting inside, the police and the EMTs found Pamela Shelley unresponsive on the bathroom floor. Her right temple had been shot, the gun was on the counter, and there was blood all over. Ronnie Hendrick was informed by the EMTs that it would take them an hour to reach the closest hospital. Ronnie promised to accompany them and said he knew how to get there more quickly by taking the back roads. Pamela wasn't in a good state, but she was still alive. However, she was declared brain dead in the hospital on January 7th after being put on life support. Arrived at the hospital and picked up the kids to take them back to Arkansas. The medical examiner determined that Pamela's death was a suicide on January 8, 2001. Given that the gunshot wound made very close contact with the skin, it was established that it was self-inflicted. However, Sheriff Carl Bowen, who was placed in charge of the case, rejected the suicide theory. Sheriff Bowen had a conversation with Jesse Suggs, who confessed that he and Pamela's relationship was quite rough because he couldn't get his act right. When asked when he last saw Pamela, Jesse said they had both shared a bed the night before she went for Texas. He further explained that Pamela had intended to return with his children on January 6th, and that he had traveled to Texas to bring them back to Arkansas. Jesse was aware of Ronnie, Pamela, and Kayla's constant issues. As part of the investigation, Jesse agreed to take a polygraph, which he successfully passed. Since Pamela Shelley was shot when Jesse was 800 miles away in Arkansas at his mother's house, he was ruled out as a suspect. The next person the investigators had a chat with was Ronnie Hendrick. He told the police that he had been outside on the porch when he heard what appeared to be a gunshot. He then rushed inside and discovered Pamela lying on the floor, bleeding from a head wound. He claimed to have protected 12-year-old Kayla and 9-year-old Dustin from the gruesome scene. Ronnie further acknowledged that Pamela and the kids had packed up their belongings that morning, preparing to return to Arkansas. According to him, Pamela Shelley had been depressed over going back to Arkansas. However, the relocation was compelled by family matters, particularly because of the discord between him and Kayla. Ronnie told the police that Pamela didn't want to return, but had to since she was afraid of losing her children. Despite the autopsy results, the investigators were bothered with the case contradictions. They wondered why Pamela Shelley packed her whole belongings into a car if she wanted to kill herself. Additionally, Ronnie Hendrick's portrayal of a young woman intent on suicide didn't line up with what authorities knew about Pamela Shelley. According to Sheriff Carl Bowen, a former deputy with the DeWitt County Sheriff's Office, Pamela Shelley's death may have been the result of an accident or homicide. In order to find answers, officials requested that Ronnie Hendrick undergo a polygraph test, to which he agreed, but failed to show up for 3 different appointments. He either postponed or simply failed to show up before completely disappearing. The investigation was concluded and the case went cold after the medical examiner determined that suicide was the cause of death. However, 7 years after Pamela Shelley's passing, Sheriff Carl Bowen decided to re-examine the case because he had never believed it was a suicide. The medical examiner nevertheless was still certain that Pamela's autopsy result was correct. Regardless, Sheriff Carl Bowen retrieved Pamela's medical records for a proper and thorough examination. It was discovered that Pamela Shelley often suffered from stress-induced seizures and she was taking a low-grade antidepressants for it. Sheriff Bowen had a conversation with Kyla, who confessed that Ronnie allegedly attacked her on January 4, 2 days before her mother was found dead. According to Kyla, Ronnie then attacked her mother and blackened her eyes so bad when she defended her from him. They later visited a hospital. Pamela and the children decided that they would inform the medical professionals that Pamela had fallen into a coffee table. After the incident, Pamela made the decision to take the children back to Arkansas on January 6th, since that was what they genuinely wanted. After this revelation, in 2008, Sheriff Carl Bowen tracked down Ronnie Hendrick at the county jail. Ronnie had been taken into custody after hitting his girlfriend. He was then asked to retell the incident that occurred on the 6th of January 2001. The police noticed inconsistencies with his stories. He was also asked to take a polygraph exam, which revealed that he was being deceptive. The investigators knew something was fishy, but they didn't have enough evidence to prosecute Ronnie for Pamela's murder. The case, however, went cold again until 4 years later in 2012, when a TV show that investigated cold cases chose to look at Pamela Shelley's case. They sought to examine the gun for DNA and fingerprints. The revelation of the results was startling. Despite the fact that the gun was Ronnie's, neither Pamela nor Ronnie's DNA was found on it. Now, the police and TV program thought the pistol had been cleaned of any form of DNA. At this point, Sheriff Carl Bowen was getting assured that Pamela didn't commit suicide. In August 2012, he went ahead to have a second conversation with Pamela's ex-husband, Jesse Suggs, and his mother Shirley. Shirley admitted to the sheriff that when Pamela was in Cairo, Texas, she and Jesse had secretly been communicating with a burner phone. When asked if she believed Pamela had killed herself, Shirley declared that she believed Ronnie Hendricks was the one who had shot her. According to Jesse Suggs, he and Pamela had a phone conversation just 30 minutes before she was shot. He claimed to have heard Ronnie enter the room, grabbed the phone, and told Jesse that the only way Pamela would be returning home to Arkansas was in a pine box. These revelations were becoming shocking, and a motive was established. The detectives had what they needed to go to a grand jury. The medical examiner soon changed Pamela Shelley's cause of death from suicide to undetermined after learning about Ronnie Hendrick's abuse towards Pamela Kyler and other women he had dated. This development is coming 11 years after Pamela Shelley had passed away. In the fall of 2012, Ronnie Hendrick was charged with Pamela Shelley's murder. Finally, 12 years after Pamela's death, Ronnie pleaded guilty and was sentenced to 22 years in prison. The case of Adam Strong. Adam Strong was born in 1972 in Cornwall, Ontario, Canada. Very little is known about his family and upbringing. He never got married and didn't have any children. Strong worked at a local gas station and also as a security guard on a movie set. People who knew him described him as eccentric and arrogant, believing he was smarter than others. He enjoyed arguing and trying to prove his point until others agreed, but he wasn't typically aggressive. On September 11, 2017, a fisherman in Oshawa, Ontario, made a disturbing discovery in the city harbor. He found a badly disfigured and decomposed human torso floating in the water. The fisherman immediately reported his finding to the police, who retrieved the remains and sent them to forensics for analysis. Due to the body's severe decomposition, experts had a hard time identifying it. The torso was missing limbs and a head, and its internal organs were gone. The only clues about the victim were that she was a young woman between 18 and 25 years old. Her fingerprints, dental records, and distinguishing features couldn't be used for identification. A partial tattoo on her neck was visible, but its design was impossible to determine due to decomposition. As a result, a DNA analysis was the only remaining option, but no matches were found in the existing database. The police then began investigating cases of young women who had gone missing in recent months. In November 2017, nearly 2 months after the discovery, authorities identified the body as 18-year-old Rory Rush, a high school student who had vanished in mid-August. She was several weeks pregnant at the time of her disappearance. Divers searched the harbor and nearby Lake Ontario shoreline, but no other body parts were found. The time and cause of death remained unknown. Experts examined the body and found numerous severe injuries inflicted while Rory was still alive, suggesting she had been tortured over a long period before her death. This discovery led to a major breakthrough in the investigation. For months later, an unexpected twist emerged. In December, the Wood family moved into a house at 19 Macmillan Drive, Oshawa, where they noticed an unpleasant smell. Their downstairs neighbor, 45-year-old Adam Strong, assured them it was just a minor plumbing issue that he would fix soon. The neighbor tried to be friendly and polite, but there was something unsettling about him. When David's wife tried to welcome him with homemade cookies, he refused to let her enter his apartment, instead stepping out into the hallway and quickly closing the door behind him. In that brief moment, she caught a glimpse of his living space, which was in disarray and was overwhelmed by the foul smell inside. Adam took the cookies, thanked the neighbor, and quickly excused himself. Later, when they crossed paths in the yard, he apologized for not inviting her in, explaining that he was about to start renovations, and his apartment was not presentable at the time. Despite his polite demeanor, he seemed visibly nervous. As the Wood family settled into their new home, they tried to ignore the unbearable smell. However, on December 29th, they finally called a plumber to investigate a sewer blockage, which had intensified the stench. Although the issue seemed minor and easily solvable, the discovery the workers made in the pipes was shocking. Even to experienced forensic experts, human body parts had been found. Sean Fenn, a plumber, and his partner were called to the Wood family's apartment to fix a clogged refrigerator drain. However, when they arrived, they were met with an overwhelming stench, which they soon discovered was coming from the apartment below, belonging to Adam Strong. Upon entering Strong's apartment, the smell intensified, becoming almost unbearable. Sean, an experienced plumber, had never encountered anything so foul-smelling in his career. While working to clear the pipe, Strong's behavior became increasingly strange and nervous. He refused to leave the area, constantly asking questions about the process. The plumbers tried to ignore Strong's antics, but what they discovered next would be shocking. As they extracted the blockage, they found over 10 kilograms of entangled flesh, hair, and bone fragments, including disfigured human fingers. Strong remained surprisingly calm, asking how the remains ended up in the pipe. Fenn immediately called the police, suspecting they had stumbled upon human remains in the pipes. When the police arrived, they confirmed the discovery of human flesh. Instead of denying the allegations, Strong calmly admitted that Rory Rush's body parts were stuck in the pipe with additional remains stored in his freezer. A search of the freezer revealed a severed head, limb fragments, and more, all packed in plastic bags. The apartment was in disarray with dirty dishes, rotting food, trash, and empty pizza boxes littering the floor. The police also found numerous adult magazines with sadistic content, as well as intimate toys, gags, whips, handcuffs, and devices for binding and hanging, suggesting a disturbing atmosphere. Adam's social media profiles openly displayed his interest in BDSM practices with explicit photos and videos. Although he didn't have a long-term partner, several former partners accused him of being abusive, leading to their breakups. He wrote reviews of adult films and magazines, indicating he spent most of his free time consuming such content. Behind his calm exterior, he led a secretive life. The police cordoned off Adam's residence, treating it as a crime scene. The initial investigation suggested that they had a lot of work ahead with potential discoveries that could be just as shocking as the head found in the refrigerator. Notably, the evidence found led investigators to suspect that the discovered body parts belonged to Rory Hash, whose torso was found in a water body 4 months earlier. A distinctive tattoo on the neck and DNA analysis supported this theory. In Adam's house, investigators found disturbing evidence of a gruesome crime. Hidden among piles of trash were the blood-stained clothes and shoes of Rory Rush, later confirmed to be the missing schoolgirl. The bedroom, where her bed was found, was covered in her blood with splatters on the walls, furniture, and ceiling. A dissection table was found in the kitchen, suggesting that the suspect had dismembered and gutted the girl there. The entire area was contaminated with blood, skin particles, hair, and bone fragments. The bathroom was equally appalling with dirt, blood, and signs of brutal acts everywhere. It appeared that Adam had attempted to dispose of the body by flushing it down the toilet in parts. But when this failed, he tried to fix the blockage himself. A large collection of sharp weapons was also found in the house, likely used to dismember the girl's body. Rory Hash was born in 1999 to a single mother, Shannon Dion. Despite her father's absence, Rory grew up in a loving environment. Thanks to her mother and grandmother, her family had a unique background, with her maternal grandfather founding a motorcycle club and being a skilled boxer with ties to the criminal underworld. Rory had a peaceful and carefree childhood, excelled in dance, and was an award-winning student. At 13, she received an award as the best cadet of the year in her local army unit. However, her life took a dramatic turn at 15 when she got introduced to drugs by a friend and became dependent. She began associating with questionable individuals, neglected her studies, and eventually stopped attending school altogether. For about a year, Rory's family tried to get her help for her addiction, but she would relapse every time. At 17, she ran away from home and turned to prostitution to support her drug habit. Then, her mother got her into a specialized program for teenagers with addictions, which forced her into treatment. This time, the efforts paid off and Rory was able to get back on track. She got a job, studied remotely, and eventually earned her high school diploma. She started planning for college and began a serious relationship with a boy named Anthony. In June 2017, Rory told her mother that she was pregnant and planned to keep the baby. However, Rory's mother didn't know that her daughter had started using drugs again. Rory met with Constable Christopher Crane at a shopping center in mid-August. He had been monitoring her for 18 months to keep her away from negative influences. During their meeting, Rory confessed that she had started using drugs again and lost her job a month prior, often exchanging sexual favors for money or drugs. Constable Crane was deeply disturbed by her revelation and promised to help. He stepped away to make an urgent call to arrange for her hospitalization. However, when he returned, Rory was gone, and the constable was unable to find her. The next day, Rory's mother and uncle took her to the hospital after finding her incoherent due to substance use. They left her in the emergency room queue and stepped out for about an hour. When they returned, they were shocked to discover that Rory had vanished. And sadly, she was never seen alive again. A review of hospital surveillance footage showed that Rory simply got up and left the hospital on her own. Her family reported her missing the next day. But despite an extensive search effort and widespread social media attention, no one was able to find her. It's likely that her addiction led her to seek out drugs at Strong's house, where she may have exchanged sexual favors for them. After Adam alerted the police to the location of the remaining body parts, an investigation was launched. Investigators expected him to cooperate, but instead, he became unresponsive and refused to answer questions at the police station. He remained calm and denied any wrongdoing. Because there was no direct evidence linking him to the girl's murder, Adam was only charged with desecrating a body. His lawyer's efforts to secure bail were unsuccessful, and he was held in jail awaiting trial. The investigators struggled to find an effective approach to questioning him, trying to elicit an emotional response that might provoke a confession. Strong was evasive when questioned about Rory's presence in his house and what he did to her, but openly discussed his fondness for bladed weapons and extensive knife collection. A thorough search of Adam's house uncovered a dirty hunting knife with dried skin fragments that appeared human in a hidden closet. Although the DNA from the knife didn't match Rory's, it belonged to another individual. It took several months to identify the owner of the DNA. But by July 2017, it was established that the traces on the weapon belonged to Candace Fitzpatrick, Rory Rush, who had vanished about 10 years prior. Candace Fitzpatrick shared similarities with Rory. Both struggled with substance abuse and legal issues, grew up in troubled families, and had a history of running away from home for months at a time. To survive, she would live with acquaintances and exchange sex for food and drugs. Born in 1989, Candace was 18 when she disappeared. Her family didn't notice her absence initially and only reported her missing almost 2 years later, by which time all leads had gone cold. Candace's life and social circle led many to believe she could have ended up anywhere. Her parents thought she had run away and held on to the hope that she would return. However, in 2018, the news from law enforcement crushed their hopes of ever seeing their daughter alive again. It's worth noting that both victims of the suspect were the same age and looked almost identical, like sisters. This led people to believe that the police had caught a serial predator. When questioned about the second woman, the suspect Adam unexpectedly agreed to cooperate in exchange for better living conditions. He wanted a private cell, a large TV, internet access, and specific meals. Law enforcement officials were outraged by his demands, but they relented to get the information. Adam began his story by talking about his difficult childhood, including how he was abused by his stepfather from the age of 5. He also described how he started torturing and killing animals from the age of 7, finding physical pleasure in these acts. When the conversation turned to Rory, Adam Strong described in detail how he had dismembered her, seemingly taking pleasure in it, but claiming he only did so because she had died from an overdose. However, the police did not believe him, and he was unable to convince them of his story. When questioned about Candace, who had disappeared 10 years prior, Strong was surprised the police knew about her. He tried to find out how they had discovered his secret, and when told about human flesh stuck to an old knife, he became somber and regretful for not taking better precautions to cover his tracks. Strong admitted to meeting Candace, but denied killing her. However, the evidence gathered did not support his claim. In an attempt to gain sympathy, he inadvertently incriminated himself. The police informed him that Rory was pregnant at the time of her death, which Strong vehemently denied. The detectives realized that Strong would argue endlessly to prove his point, so they decided to provoke him into revealing more than he intended. They insisted that the victim was pregnant, and Strong, trying to prove otherwise, described in detail how he had examined Rory's reproductive organs and felt a pulsation, leading the police to believe that she might have still been alive during the attack. Later, Strong tried to deny everything, but his statements had been recorded on camera and were presented in court. He refused to disclose what he had done with Candace's body, and her remains were never found. The detectives were unable to learn about any other possible victims. During one of the last interrogations, Strong callously stated that he would like his condolences to be passed on to Rory's parents. At the trial, his lawyers argued that Strong was mentally ill and unable to be held responsible for his actions. However, a psychiatric evaluation determined that despite certain disorders, Strong was aware of his actions and could be held legally accountable. The trial began in September 2020, 3 years after Rory's death and 12 years after Candace's disappearance. Strong was charged with 2 counts of murder and desecration of Rory's remains. Although he never admitted his guilt, the evidence and his confessions left no doubt about his involvement in the heinous crimes. 4 of Strong's former partners also testified, describing his cruelty and violent tendencies. According to the prosecution, Strong had lured both women to his home, promising them money for intimate services, and then killed them. Adam Strong brutally murdered his victim, subjecting her to a prolonged and agonizing ordeal. He likely killed her out of fear that she would report him to the authorities. On September 4th, his mobile phone signal was near the city harbor, where he had dumped the victim's torso, hoping the current would carry it away. In April 2021, Adam Strong was convicted of murdering Candace Fitzpatrick and Rory Hash, as well as desecrating Hash's remains. He received a life sentence without parole. However, Strong showed no remorse, stating in his final remarks that his prison cell was an improvement over his previous living conditions. 6 months into his sentence, Strong unexpectedly revealed the location of his first victim's remains. The police followed his directions, and after several months of searching, they discovered human bones. DNA testing confirmed that the skeleton belonged to Candace Fitzpatrick, which was officially announced. Investigators believe that there may be additional victims in the Adam Strong case, possibly including at least one more woman. Notably, when Strong was initially arrested, his personal belongings were confiscated, including a chain with 3 rings. He later requested the items return, stating that the rings held sentimental value. Relatives of Rory and Candace later identified 2 of the rings as belonging to their daughters. However, the third ring remains unidentified, sparking speculation about potential additional victims. Haley Dodd was born in the United Kingdom on November 30th, 1981 to Raymond and Margaret Dodd. She grew up in a fairly large, close-knit family with 5 other siblings. When Haley was younger, in the year 1990, she and her whole family immigrated to Australia, settling in the village of Mandorah. Throughout her elementary, middle, and high school, Haley Dodd was an excellent student. She participated in sports and had intentions to further her studies. She wanted to become either a veterinarian or a school teacher. However, before making a final choice for a career, Haley wanted to go on an adventure exploring the whole of Australia. For this reason, at the age of 17, when she obtained her high school diploma, she and her best friend Lisa left on a trip to Western Australia. Their goal was to spend a few months away from home rather than just driving through nearby towns and tourist hotspots. The 2 friends planned to look for temporary jobs while traveling in order to pay for their living expenses, which included food and transportation. They planned to enjoy their vacation by hitchhiking within cities in Australia, which at the time didn't seem like a risky idea. 1 out of 100 young women were being killed while hitchhiking at the time. But given how many people did so safely, there was no widespread fear sparked by these crimes. Haley Dodd was certain that even with a friend by her side, her parents would forbid her from traveling by hitchhiking. She then assured them that she would be taking the bus instead. In July 1999, Haley and Lisa traveled to a place called Dangara. They already had a part-time job where they would work as day laborers on a nearby farm there. They were residing at a camping ground where they got a space to sleep for the night in exchange for a small fee. These camping grounds are very popular in Australia primarily due to their low prices. A few days before starting work, Haley made the decision to use the rest of her free time to travel to a family friend's farm near Murrah. She had once been there and wanted to visit them after a long time. She planned to hitchhike to the farm, but Lisa was reluctant to let her leave alone. Haley insisted that she need not worry and would return soon. As a parting gift, Lisa gave Haley herself the defense folding knife and some cash so she could call her from the phone booth. On the July 29th, at around 8 a.m., Haley left the camping site and headed towards the farm. Meanwhile, at the farm, family friends were expecting and waiting for her, but she never showed up. Being concerned, they decided to inform her mother. Margaret Dodd immediately called the police out of concern that something might have happened to her daughter. She first dialed the 0 emergency number and explained the situation at hand. After hearing her story, the operator concluded that there was nothing urgent about the situation. She, however, told Margaret to go file a missing person report at the nearby police station, which she did. Going through the timeline of events of that day, the detectives started looking for Haley. They started off by going to the campsite where Lisa was staying. After being told why they were there, Lisa was shocked to learn that Haley never made it to the farm. She was able to provide the police with a detailed description of each outfit Haley wore on that particular day, as well as a sketch of the earring Haley was wearing. She had purchased these earrings a few days prior to her disappearance. She was drawn to the piece of jewelry when she and Lisa went shopping to treat themselves to some inexpensive items. Haley had no idea that those earrings would hold the key to unlocking the terrible mystery of her disappearance at the time. Investigators released details regarding the missing teenager, including her description. Despite being almost 18-year-old, Haley appeared much younger. She stood at 152 centimeters tall and weighed a little over 40 pounds. As the investigation progresses, the first witness was easily found by the police. It happened to be the truck driver who had given her a ride that day. According to the man, Haley had reportedly knocked on his window at a gas station and requested a ride to a place called Mora, where the farm was. Although the trucker was en route to another farm, he agreed to give her a ride for the majority of the distance. She was later dropped off by the man above 50 kilometers from Moro, close to the town of Ashindra. He further reported that Haley had been in a cheerfully good spirits, talking about her trip the entire way. He had also given her $15 to get something to eat after she said she was running low on cash. In case she needed a ride back, he also left her his phone number. Since he traveled that road almost all the time, he wouldn't have minded giving her another ride. Detectives later received a number of calls from witnesses who claimed to have seen Haley in the vicinity. The police eventually came to the conclusion that Haley had been walking on foot along the northwest road towards Mora based on the witness's testimony. Evidently, she was unable to hitch a ride from a driver at the gas station. As a result of that, she then made the decision to walk alongside the road in an effort to hitch a ride. Another witness claimed that he gave Haley a ride to the Winjardi Road turnoff before she continued walking towards her destination. The following witness was a female driver who was passing by. She caught sight of Haley just as she was out of another car and walking towards Mora. More than 10 witnesses in total called the police. Detectives came to the conclusion that Haley was last seen at around 11:45 a.m. on the Northwest Road, about 50 kilometers from Mora. However, there was another witness who, despite not having seen Haley, nonetheless told the police something unsettling. According to the man, his engine was overheating, so he stopped on the side of the Northwest Road. While fixing up his car, he briefly heard a dog barking before a female piercing scream. Since it might have been far away, he was unable to see the source of the noise. The road traveled through a barren, flat area with little background noise. Giving all of this information, the police's prognosis was disappointing from the onset. Eddie Rowe, the lead detective, decided that they should search for the body rather than think about the possibility that Haley might still be alive. However, management forbade him from doing so. Haley Dodd's case was left at the status of the missing person case. A murder investigation would have given the police more options than a missing person investigation, but they lacked any leads that could have helped them find Haley. So they started looking for potential kidnappers right away. They were able to locate several local suspects in a short period of time, but the police eventually concentrated on 3 men. One of them was a teacher at a nearby school, another worked there as a part-time gardener, and the third lived close to where Haley had disappeared. Each of them offered an alibi and pleaded not guilty when questioned. Although the police were unable to find any evidence to the contrary, they were unable to conclude with certainty that they were innocent. However, things quickly changed drastically. A neighbor of one of the suspects went to the police. He revealed to them that on the day Haley Dodd went missing, Francis Work, a 43-year-old school gardener, had taken his car to go shopping in Mora. Around 1 p.m. later that day, Francis came back to his house, and he noticed that inside the car had suffered damage. The dashboard had signs of an impact, and the turn signal knob was broken as well. The neighbor was unable to ask him what had happened to the car because when Francis Work arrived home, he threw his shopping bags in the kitchen before mounting his motorcycle and leaving again. The police decided to re-interview Francis because they thought this story was strange. Francis, however, claimed that he was many miles away from the alleged location of Haley's abduction. He claimed that after getting home, he immediately rode his motorcycle to a party in the city of Perth. He said he wasn't able to make it down there because he went over the speed limit on the way there, which resulted in a serious accident that made him go to the hospital. With the information at their disposal, the detectives were able to ask the obvious question. Where was he going in such a hurry? Investigators decided to request a search warrant for his home after deciding that his own testimony was extremely strange. The police searched his home but were unable to uncover any evidence. Forensics also examined the car. They searched the car and took the seat's cover off in order to examine them properly in the lab. However, all these resulted in nothing, and Francis Work was let off the hook. Not long after that, he moved to Queensland on the other side of the country, leaving the detectives without any leads while the case was left hanging on the shelf. Detectives made attempts to move the case forward by locating fresh witnesses and evidence, but all efforts were futile. After 8 long years, in February 2007, Francis Work returned to the police radar. At that time, he was residing in a remote area of a small town. Next to his door lived an elderly couple who were relaxing one morning on their porch, when they suddenly became horrified to see a young woman running in their direction completely naked and covered in blood. When she requested for help, the couple immediately called the police. The victim claimed that the previous evening, she had attempted to get a ride. A man pulled up in front of her and offered to take her to wherever she was going. During the journey, the man then informed her that he had to go to one location in order to fill up his car with gas. They later pulled up to a house in the middle of nowhere, where he called to her inside and offered her some tea, which sadly she didn't deny. He attacked her shortly after that, and after a brief struggle, succeeded in taming and tying her up. The victim endured horrific violence and torture for the next few hours. Additionally, her attacker stole one of her earrings by ripping it off. This man was Francis Work, as you may have guessed. In the morning, the woman realized she could run once the rope was off her hands and her legs were free. She immediately started trying hard to loose the rope. After she succeeded, she watched out for Francis Work, waiting for him to get as far away as possible before dashing out through the back door. One smart move to note in the midst of this chaos was that the woman took off her necklace and threw it under the bed before leaving. She decided to leave some personal items in Francis's home out of concern that the police might not find any evidence to support her claim when she eventually reports him. And guess what? That single act of hers actually worked. After searching Francis' home, the police discovered the identical necklace and arrested him right away. After the trial, he quickly came to the conclusion that he could not get away with what he had done and made the decision to come clean. He then received a 12-year prison term. Although Francis' arrest was reported to the Western Australian police who handled the Haley Dodd's case, they showed no sign of interest whatsoever. The 8-year-old cold case, which so closely resembled the facts of Francis Warwick's crime, was not revived by the police. The detectives only agreed to reopen the case at Haley's mother's insistence. However, they quickly came to the conclusion again that Francis was still innocent in the Haley Dodd's case and that there was nothing they could do to change that. The police rebuffed Haley's family's repeated requests for a thorough investigation, saying that they had already done everything within their power. Haley's relatives spent tens of thousands of dollars on private investigators in a futile attempt to wait for law enforcement assistance. It was 6 long years before the case changed course. It was discovered in 2013 that the police had simply forgotten about the evidence, which ultimately proved to be the key to cracking the case. Tracy Horan, a medical examiner, submitted a request to reopen the Haley Dodd's case. The reason was that the exact same car seat covers that had been taken from France's neighbor's vehicle in 1999 had been discovered in the evidence storage. Unexpectedly, it happened that for 14 years, no blood, DNA, or other forms of evidence had ever been tested on the seat covers. When the forensics went through the covers more thoroughly this time, they discovered a woman's earring that had become tangled in the material. Detectives went back to the drawings Lisa drew for the police shortly after her friend vanished. They came across the drawing of the earrings Haley was wearing that day and were shocked to see that it was the same earring found in the covers of the car's seat. Experts also found a human hair that had been removed from the car's mats. DNA sample was taken from the hair, and it matched Haley Dodd's mother's DNA. That implied that the hair was almost certainly Haley's. However, the likelihood was not 100%, making it very challenging to bring charges against Francis as soon as possible. As soon as the information reached the media, the police came under heavy fire. This evidence was right under the investigators' noses for 14 years. But during that time, they never remembered it. Naturally, such a discovery altered the course of the investigation, and the detectives traveled to another region of the country to question Francis once more. Francis Work was still serving a jail term at the time for assaulting a woman in February 2007. He told the detectives the same story that he had told them 14 years earlier. He denied being involved in the murder and insisted that he was out shopping in Mora when Haley Dodd was kidnapped. The nearly 4-hour-long interrogation produced no results, so the police were forced to get the case ready for trial. He wasn't officially charged with Haley's murder until 2015, at which point he was deported to Western Australia. The trial started in late 2017. All of the evidence presented, according to Francis' defense, was circumstantial. His defense claimed that the earrings Haley Dodd purchased were both inexpensive and popular. Therefore, another woman might have left it in the car. Although not an exact match, the hair in the car showed a 100% match to Haley's DNA, though it would have been extremely unlikely to make a mistake here. That was sufficient for the attorneys, but the judge didn't find any of these arguments convincing. If Francis' crime from 2007 hadn't occurred, perhaps he would have still had a chance to escape punishment. However, he did more than just abducting the hitchhiking woman. He also stole her earring. The prosecution's theory that the man was hoarding the victim's earrings as trophies ultimately raised more questions about him. As a result, the judge sentenced him to 21 in prison after finding him guilty of kidnapping and killing Haley Dodd. All of these occurred while his prior sentence was still being processed. Francis Work was sentenced at age 62, but the story did not end there. The jury was of the opinion that Francis abducted, killed, and then hid Haley's body, which was never discovered. Francis also refused to admit to his crimes. In 2018, Haley's mother worked to pass a new law that states murderers are not eligible for parole if they refuse to reveal the location of their victim's body. Haley's mother repeatedly asked the killer to reveal where he hid her daughter's body, but he refused. 2020 saw the occurrence of another notable occasion. Francis' appeal to have his sentence overturned was accepted by the court, and a new hearing was scheduled. His attorneys continued to argue that he would not have had time to abduct Haley Dodd between his trip to Mora and his return home. However, the court stated that the time span gave him well enough chance to do so, especially given the haste with which he arrived home and immediately left for Perth on his motorcycle. Even though the hair and the earring were still considered to be two of the most important pieces of evidence against him, Francis was still successful in having his sentence reduced. The court reduced his sentence from 21 years to 18 years after finding him guilty of involuntary manslaughter. But because of a law that was passed in 2018, he would still be unable to leave prison if he refused to say where he hid Haley Dodd's body. The detectives continue to be busy because of another aspect of the entire case. They are confident that Francis has victimized numerous additional women, and that none of them have been able to escape his wicked ways. This psychotic man may have been offering pretentious rides to young women on the streets for years. Only he knows what happened to them. The disappearance of a woman in late 2005 was one of the most likely comparable cases. She had hitchhiked to another city and had vanished without a trace. Because Francis knew the victim personally, the detective in charge of the case is certain that he abducted her. But there is currently no evidence to pin him to the crime. It might turn up again in the police evidence room a few years down the road, but that wouldn't matter to the criminal. Francis would have been charged for the murder of Haley Dodd in 1999 if the police had conducted a more thorough inspection of the car. We currently have no way of knowing how many lives he destroyed in the years that followed. But sooner or later, the mystery may be unraveled. This entire story has another unsettling aspect. Do you recall that the police named 3 main suspects, including Francis, during the preliminary stages of the investigation? 5 months after Haley Dodd vanished, one of the suspects killed his wife. The second, who worked as a teacher, ended up being among the worst child predators in Australian history. Unfortunately, the police were powerless to stop them at the time of Haley's murder before they could harm someone else. The case of Sarah Papenheim. Sarah Papenheim was born on January 30th, 1997 in Minnesota to Donnie Odegaard and Jerry Papenheim. She was their second child with an older brother named Josh, with whom she shared a close bond that grew stronger as they grew older. In the 2nd grade, Sarah's family moved from Minneapolis to Redding, California. She graduated from Foothill High School in 2015, where she was not only a diligent student, but also an enthusiastic member of the school band, playing the drums. Sarah had a deep passion for music, particularly foreign music and drumming. She was a skilled drummer and regularly participated in weekly jam sessions at various reading venues. Her drumming skills stood out, and she was a rare female presence on stage. At 18, Sarah returned to her native Minnesota with her mother and brother, following her parents' divorce. She continued to play drums at various Minnesota venues, which eventually led her to meet renowned blues guitarist and singer Bernard Allison. He was impressed by her performance, and Sarah began to occasionally perform at his concerts. By 19, Sarah had become a local blues sensation, earning the nickname Ronald McDonald due to her striking, wide smile. Josh's life was deeply affected by his parents' divorce. He had been grappling with depression and mental health issues for years. Those close to him at the time had no idea how desperate his situation would become. On an ordinary day in February 2016, Donnie received an unexpected visit from the police. When she opened the door, they asked about her relationship to Josh Papenheim. After identifying herself as his mother, the officers delivered devastating news that would forever change her life. Tragically, 20-year-old Josh had taken his own life, leaving his loved ones reeling from the loss. As Donnie would later recall, Sarah cried so intensely that her tear ducts dried up. Under Josh's obituary, her message still remains, promising to love her son forever. Sarah and her brother Josh were extremely close. She was devastated by his passing and the fact that he had taken his own life. Rather than letting the pain overwhelm her, Sarah decided to pursue psychology to help people struggling with mental health issues in the future. Sarah had been in touch with Nico Carson, a guy from the Netherlands, for a while. She decided to move there and enroll at Erasmus University in Rotterdam, where she began studying psychology. Nico, being a native speaker, helped Sarah navigate her loss, assisted her with her studies, and supported her in any way possible. Although Sarah was dedicated to her studies and work, her passion for music never faded. She reached out to Bernard Allison, a fellow musician and friend she had performed with in the past, to share her excitement about finally saving up enough money to buy the drum kit she had always dreamed of owning. In January 2017, Bernard Allison went on tour in Europe with his band. On Sarah's 20th birthday, January 30th, she attended his concert in Germany with Nico, and as soon as Bernard saw her, he invited her on stage to play the drums alongside him, just like they used to do. Sarah lived in a third-floor apartment in a complex just a mile from the university in Rotterdam. As 2018 drew to a close, she was looking forward to spending Christmas back home in the United States. Her flight was scheduled about a week before New Year's Eve, but everything took an unexpected turn on December 12th. Donnie Odegaard's heart sank when she saw a police officer standing on her doorstep, a sight that brought back painful memories of 2016, the year her son passed away. As the officer began questioning her about her daughter, her legs started shaking uncontrollably. She instinctively knew what the officer was about to tell her, yet she couldn't bring herself to accept the devastating news. The officer, convinced that he was speaking to Sarah Papenheim's mother, delivered the heartbreaking news. Her daughter had passed away. Donnie felt like she'd been punched in the gut. The news was too much to bear, and she lost consciousness. This tragedy was all too familiar. She had lost her 20-year-old son just a few years ago, and now her 21-year-old daughter was gone too. The girl lived in a third-floor apartment in a complex where most residents were students. For the past year, Sarah had rented an apartment there and shared it with Joel Shelley, a fellow student and talented double bass musician like herself. Their shared passion for music brought them together. Sarah was an outgoing and cheerful person, unlike her roommate Joel, who had a short temper and occasionally quarreled with her. Despite his difficult behavior, Sarah was loyal and didn't want to abandon him to his problems, possibly because she remembered what had happened to her brother. 6 days before her death, Sarah confided in her friend Adam Pryor in Wisconsin, expressing fear of Joel, who had told her he intended to harm 3 people he disliked. A couple of days before she passed away, Sarah also spoke to her mother on the phone, sharing her growing concerns about Joel's behavior. Her mother advised her to find a new place to live immediately and to keep her distance from Joel until she moved out. On Wednesday, December 12, 2018, at 12:20 p.m., Sarah and Joel got into a loud fight at their apartment, which prompted their next-door neighbors to call the police. When the police arrived, they found Sarah lying on the floor, unconscious and suffering from multiple stab wounds. Despite attempts to revive her, Sarah sadly died. Joel, her roommate, was not present at the scene. It seemed he had fled, and the police launched a search for him. After questioning neighbors on the same floor, the officers discovered that Joel had hastily left the apartment, taking a large double bass with him. This unusual detail was included in the description sent out to authorities less than 2 hours after the crime. The police eventually tracked down 23-year-old Joel Shelley at Eindhoven train station, about 60 miles from Rotterdam. As it turned out, Joel was heading to visit his parents, who lived in Eindhoven. During the train ride, he called his mother and confessed to killing Sarah. The judge ordered Shelley to be held for 14 days to determine if he suffered from mental health issues. An autopsy revealed that Sarah's body had 27 stab wounds, including several in her neck, abdomen, and back. 2 days after Sarah's death, Donnie Odegaard traveled to the Netherlands to arrange for her daughter's body to be returned to their home country. This required raising $40,000, which the family was able to do with the help of supportive individuals. Donnie's first priority was to discover if Sarah had reported to the police that her roommate was planning to attack 3 people. It turned out that Sarah had not contacted the authorities. However, she had reached out to social workers who assist people with psychological difficulties. These social workers visited Shelley and found him to be calm, straightforward, and coherent in his answers, giving them the impression that he was normal. The next day, Sarah had to contact social services again. This was because Shelley, in a rage, started hitting himself with a hammer and threatened to harm several people soon. Sarah was worried that Joel would discover she had reported him to the authorities. However, the social worker didn't have time to respond to Sarah's second request because she had already died. Shelley was accused of causing Sarah Papenheim's death. He admitted his guilt, but claimed he didn't recall taking her life. He remembered the fight, but when he came to, he was already in the shower, cleaning himself. The trial began in March 2019. Sarah's mother, Donnie Odegaard, attended every hearing, relying on an interpreter to understand the proceedings. During the trial, Shelley claimed he suffered from delirium and heard voices in his head. When the judge asked Shelley if the voices in his head had told him to fight Sarah, he said he didn't know and couldn't recall. He also claimed he didn't remember what sparked the fight between them. Before the verdict was announced in December 2019, medical experts testified that Shelley suffered from multiple mental health disorders and required long-term treatment. However, they concluded that he was still responsible for taking Sarah Papenheim's life. The experts reasoned that Shelley remembered the start of the fight and physically struggling with Sarah, and he had the ability to choose whether to stop or grab the knife. He chose the latter and therefore should be punished. The prosecutor requested a 10-year prison sentence for Shelley, but the Rotterdam judge sentenced him to 6 years in prison followed by involuntary commitment to a psychiatric hospital. The court explained that it rejected the prosecutor's 10-year sentence request due to Shelley's youth and his significantly impaired mental state at the time of the crime. As a result, Shelley cannot be fully held accountable for the proven facts of the case. The court has stated that due to the seriousness and unpredictability of the crime, as well as the suspect's severe psychological disorders, there is a high likelihood of him committing another violent crime. The suspect requires long-term treatment and supervision in a clinical setting for his chronic conditions. The court views the psychiatric detention as a form of punishment for Shelley, who has expressed willingness to undergo treatment for depression and other disorders. Shelley will remain in detention for treatment until the court, which will review his progress every 2 years, decides that he is well enough to be released. Additionally, the court has ordered Shelley to pay €68,700 in compensation to Sarah's family. Donnie Odegaard was outraged by the sentence, claiming it was not justice. In her opinion, the minimum sentence in America should have been at least 10 years. She pointed out that Shelley could have faced life imprisonment or even the death penalty, ensuring he would never have the chance to commit such a heinous crime again. Her main concern was that Shelley might be released on parole in just 4 years, a prospect she vowed to fight against using every means at her disposal to keep him incarcerated for as long as possible. An investigation was also conducted into the social workers Sarah had contacted. The conclusion was that they were not culpable, as they lacked the necessary expertise to identify the disorders more. Shelley was subsequently diagnosed with Thank you for joining us on this journey into the depths of unsolved mysteries. Cold cases not only challenge our understanding of the past, but also ignite our curiosity and determination for answers. Remember to subscribe to stay updated on our latest investigations. And if you have any information regarding the cases we've covered, don't hesitate to reach out. Together, we can shed light on the shadows of the past and bring closure to those who seek it. Until next time, stay vigilant, stay curious, and never stop seeking the truth.